Yeah, so we're actually working on a project on that right now. We're calling it the Energy-Based Risk Assessment Project, where we're looking at what predicts, control presence in the field. And one of my former PhD students, Alif, studied this. There are some pretty strong signals out there for situations that don't have good control of the energy. Work situations where we have a lot of schedule pressure, that leads to cutting corners and doing things, being rushed, and doing things a little more quickly. There's a big one in terms of being able to respond to change, not identify every single change that's going to happen, but organizations and crews that know how to deal with the dynamic nature of work. There's also competency around being able to recognize hazards, in particular critical hazards. That's a kind of an assumed skill that people think everybody has, but we have pretty big gaps. And so those types of strengths show us strengths in the controls, and then they also, the opposite's true, the weaknesses. And I think that the strongest factor of them all is whether or not we're having really good planning and coordination just before the job begins, right? So that's been the strongest signal in the research so far, is that planning for the work as we're imagining it will be, and how we're going to deal with changes, that's the driver of good control during work.
You also found that the crew familiarity, or the supervisor familiarity, or the foreman familiarity, can you talk about that one briefly?
Yeah, so it's familiarity with each other and among the crew members, and it's also familiarity of the crew with their work. So the work configuration itself. Both of those had some driving force towards good control. Crew familiarity with each other tends to be uniformly positive, more familiarity being better. People's familiarity with their work, however, is a bit more complicated. So if you're really and you don't know what you're looking at, that's not so good, because you don't know what controls need to be in place, and there might be complexity to it. But on the other end, if you're very, very, very familiar with the work, you may be normalized against the risk and too comfortable, and tend to drift towards being closer to the energy, or being able to work really, really quickly without a control in place. So it's a bit of a bathtub curve, as we've seen in factors before. So familiarity with the work has a bit of complexity. We want to be kind of in that thick middle, and the extremes tend to be problematic.